Women versus Feminism, the Age of the Gender War. There's a line Joanna Williams repeats like a quiet thunderclap. There's never been a better time to be a woman. It sounds almost too cheerful to belong in a book titled Women versus Feminism. But that's exactly her point. We live in a world where women vote, study, lead, love, own, and choose in ways that would have seemed miraculous a century ago. Girls outperform boys in school. Women make up the majority of university graduates in Britain. More women hold professional positions, lead businesses, sit in parliament, and drive cultural change than at any time in history. And yet, Williams asks, why does feminism sound so angry? Why, in an age of unprecedented opportunity, does the dominant narrative still insist that women are oppressed, disadvantaged, or silenced? Why does liberation feel like a complaint? To her, the answer lies in the mutation of a movement. Feminism, once the language of freedom, she argues, has turned into the language of grievance. What began as an appeal for equality has hardened into a habit of accusation. She writes that modern feminism is now obsessed with trivial issues, skinny models, badly phrased jokes, and misplaced compliments, and with the regulation of male behavior rather than the empowerment of women. It's a sharp line, and a risky one, because it cuts against an entire cultural mood, a mood that sees feminism as unquestionable, almost sacred, the moral oxygen of modernity. To challenge it, as Williams does, feels like heresy. And yet her book is not a sneer at women's struggles, it's a lament that the cause which once fought to open doors now spends its energy counting micro-offenses inside them. She begins with data, but she ends with philosophy. Look, she says, at the evidence. Girls are thriving in schools, outperforming boys at nearly every stage. Women dominate higher education. The pay gap, that endlessly quoted measure of injustice, shrinks dramatically when you account for working patterns, job type, and life choices. None of this means utopia, but it means progress. So why, she asks, does feminism still insist we are living in chains? Her answer is uncomfortable, because the story of oppression has become too useful to abandon. Victimhood, she suggests, has become a kind of cultural currency, an identity that buys sympathy, moral authority, and sometimes power. In her words, quote, feminism today encourages women to see themselves primarily as victims rather than as agents of their own lives, end quote. That's not just social commentary, that's philosophy. Williams is asking, what happens to freedom when we no longer believe in our own agency? When empowerment is replaced by perpetual grievance? When the ability to act is overshadowed by the expectation of harm? It's tempting to dismiss her as reactionary, but Williams is not pining for the 1950s. She's not telling women to go home, she's asking us to go forward, without dragging the chains of old resentments. She's asking whether feminism, in clinging to its enemies, has forgotten its purpose. There's a striking phrase she uses, the gender war. To Williams, it's not metaphorical, it's real, fought in classrooms, media, and politics. But it's not a war for equality anymore, it's a war of attrition. Each side, men and women, locked in an endless tally of grievance. Who suffers more? Who's to blame? It's a cultural Cold War, and everyone's exhausted. She writes that the narrative pits men and women against each other in a never-ending gender war that benefits no one. And she's right. Wars always produce casualties, rarely victors. We used to speak of feminism as the liberation of both sexes from narrow roles. Now she says we measure progress by how loudly we can condemn the opposite sex. The irony? In fighting patriarchy, modern feminism may have absorbed its own rigidity, its own appetite for control. She calls this the new moralism, a feminism that polices the small to avoid confronting the large. She takes special aim at the academia and the media, where feminism, she argues, has become a doctrine rather than a debate. Universities teach gender theory as if it were gospel. Students are told they inhabit systems of oppression too intricate to escape. And in that story, men are default villains, women default victims. What once empowered women to speak their minds now warns them that the world is too hostile to hear them. The result, she claims, is not strength, but fragility. A generation raised to seek safety, not freedom. And safety, she warns, can become a very polite kind of prison. Philosophically, Williams' argument draws from a very old idea: the tension between freedom and protection. The Enlightenment taught that to be free is to take responsibility for oneself. But contemporary culture, she argues, increasingly treats protection as the highest good. We protect feelings, identities, sensibilities, even at the cost of honesty. We censor to be kind, silence to be safe. And in doing so, we trade courage for comfort. That's not just a feminist issue, it's a civilizational one. As she might put it, when fear of offense replaces freedom of thought, everyone loses, including women. One of her most provocative claims concerns the gender pay gap. She doesn't deny its existence, she denies its mythology. The pay gap, she writes, is not evidence of discrimination, but the result of choices. The kinds of work women and men do, the hours they work, the priorities they set. She points out that many women choose part-time or flexible work for reasons of family, care, or preference. To frame those choices as oppression, she argues, is to deny women the very agency feminism once fought for. In other words, if equality means only mirroring men's decisions, then it's not equality, it's imitation. And imitation is the opposite of liberation. Williams' tone can be sardonic. She mocks what she calls the trivialities of modern feminism: outrage over advertising, song lyrics, or jokes on Twitter. Her point isn't that sexism has vanished, but that the moral energy once spent on genuine injustice is now squandered on symbols. Outrage, she says, has become entertainment. We perform anger because it feels virtuous. And in that performance, we lose sight of the real issues: poverty, family breakdown, education, freedom of speech, the things that actually shape women's lives. It's a daring accusation, because it suggests that the most privileged feminists, those with platforms and PhDs, have turned feminism into a boutique ideology, an endless seminar on microaggressions while real suffering happens elsewhere. And what makes women versus feminism more than a rant is its deeper moral concern. Williams believes that the endless gender war dehumanizes both sexes. Men are taught to apologize for existing. Women are taught to suspect every glance, every compliment, every interaction. In this climate, intimacy becomes negotiation. Trust becomes liability. Love, that old, messy, human bond, is replaced by politics. She doesn't romanticize the past, but she mourns the loss of grace. The ability to forgive, to laugh, to see others as individuals rather than categories. She writes that feminism's greatest failure has to be forgotten the humanity of men. That sentence lands like a confession and a challenge, because if feminism forgets the humanity of men, it will eventually forget its own. Now, critics of Williams are not silent. They say she builds her case on caricature, cherry-picking the loudest, angriest voices and ignoring the millions of quiet feminists doing good work. They accuse her of ignoring intersectional inequalities, of downplaying harassment, of writing from a position of comfort. And perhaps some of that is true, but dismissing her entirely would be too easy. The strength of her book is not in its perfection, but in its provocation. She dares to ask questions most people avoid because they sound impolite. If women are strong, why must we treat them as fragile? If men and women are equal, why must we speak as if they're enemies? If feminism means freedom, why does it often sound like fear? Those are philosophical questions, not partisan ones. Under the statistics, Williams is probing something existential. What does it mean to be human in an age obsessed with identity? What happens when we see ourselves primarily as members of a group, gender, race, sexuality, rather than as moral individuals? Her answer echoes the humanist tradition. We shrink. We lose the capacity for empathy, for irony, for growth. We trade conversation for slogans. We no longer ask, "What is true?" We ask, Whose side are you on? And yet she is not hopeless. Her book ends with a call, not to abandon feminism, but to liberate it. She writes, quote, "We all need to be liberated from the gender wars," end quote. That's the core message. Not women against men, not feminism against tradition, but humanity against cynicism. She wants a feminism that trusts women to think for themselves, to make their own mistakes, to laugh at absurdity, to embrace contradiction. A feminism of confidence, not complaint. A feminism that treats equality not as a quota, but as a moral fact of our shared humanity. In the end, women versus feminism is less about gender than about truth. It asks whether we have the courage to look beyond ideology, to see life as more than a power struggle. Because when every conversation becomes a contest, there is no room left for grace.